Greetings and welcome to GatherVerse Legal and Governance Summit. May we prepare to explore. Thank you for joining us. May our gather be well.
Hello, my name is Britton Heller, and welcome to the GatherVerse Legal Summit. I'm here today to talk to you about existing law and extended reality. Existing law has not caught up to extended reality. XR needs a strong legal framework that we don't yet have, and this is what will ensure mass adoption while keeping users safe. If other technologies provide a template, I anticipate 5 trends will emerge in the immediate future that will help us contemplate what law will look like in this brave new world. Number 1, basic legal tenets will have challenges adapting to XR. I'm a former prosecutor. I used to prosecute genocide and war crimes for both the US government and the International Criminal Court. And I know from experience that courts are always very slow moving. The decisions that I've seen courts make based off of technology like the internet are a bit wacky. And I find that when a court is dealing with new technology, it's always based on the technology that comes before. So expect decisions related to XR to be wacky and based on precedents you will find in Web 2.0. One example of how the pre-existing law tends to show up in the pre-existing medium tends to show up in law are if you look at legal process applications, they read like a laundry list of technology of times past. I remember asking a colleague what a Bernoulli drive was because I saw it listed in a process when we were trying to get a warrant or a subpoena. We would list all the potentially applicable technologies we could think of. Bernoulli drives at that point in time were far, far, far outdated, but the Department of Justice kept them in warrant applications in case there were one that might be applicable. Related to this, basic substantive and procedural concepts will need to be rethought out in relation to digital spaces. When I was thinking about this, some basic questions came to mind. What does jurisdiction look like in a space outside of physical and national boundaries? Can torts like assault and battery be charged from activity in the metaverse? Activity that is committed by digital beings in digital spaces, but based on the neurology and the neuroscience behind how XR affects us, can actually impact our bodies and our minds. Related to this, what about sexual harassment and potential sexual assaults that feel very real based on how your brain interprets activity happening in the metaverse? How will legal discovery cover data originating from and stored within the metaverse? Will there be a new category of metaverse metadata? And will you still be my friend because I said that? How will criminal prosecutors have to subpoena or get warrants for metaverse-related material? There's a difference in legal process based on whether the government is asking for subscriber information versus content. What will be necessary to ensure that Brady material or potentially exculpatory evidence that is shared by the government with a defendant is found in the metaverse? We haven't seen any of these issues come to the fray yet, but as we spend more and more time in these environments, and as we conduct more of our everyday lives, like commerce and training and wellness activities and socialization, these won't be hypothetical questions anymore. And the jokes that I make about metaverse metadata will actually be very salient for how the criminal justice system treats our intentions and our activity in virtual worlds. Number 2, look to administrative law as a first mover in this space. So far, if you look at US law, there has been one court case related to activity in the metaverse. And this happened earlier in 2022, in April, in the Western District of New York, under Judge Gerasi. The case is called Panara versus HTC Corporation. And the case involved a man who was deaf and was a huge gamer. He was concerned that he wasn't able to access Viveport Infinity, which he described as a Netflix for VR, because closed captioning was not provided for him. So he couldn't keep up with the games, he couldn't keep up with the trends, and he couldn't participate in social forums in Viveport. He filed suit against the platform, meaning HTC Corporation and all of its subsidiaries. The court found that Viveport Infinity, or a Netflix for VR, did not meet the Americans with Disabilities Act accessibility standards. The court found it was a place of public accommodation. HTC argued that Viveport Infinity was software and not a physical place. But the court found that requiring a physical structure or some connection to a physical threshold would result in arbitrary treatment, meaning it wouldn't be fair based on the intent of the Americans with Disabilities Act to find that you would need a physical structure in order to apply protections that would give accessibility rights to all Americans. Now, the court limited its reasoning to this Netflix-style case alone, but this sets the stage going forward. What was at issue in this case was accessibility over individual acts. So access over the actions of individual applications. And this is important if you work for a company or advise a company and are making a list about what you have to do to launch your product or to keep your product moving without exposing it to legal risk. So issues about safety and accessibility should now be pushed to the forefront. And oftentimes companies will look at this as a secondary concern after getting primary legal formation an e-commerce setup on their platform. Number 3, privacy law will need to adapt, and quickly. Privacy law is a fundamental tenet that underlies all of our activity in digital spaces. We've seen this on the internet, and we will see this coming full force in the metaverse. Just like I talked about with constitutional law and tort law and fundamental legal precepts, we will have to look at the building blocks of privacy law to understand how they can and should be applied in new digital worlds. For example, how do issues like the third-party doctrine function when ensuring privacy protections in a metaverse-based platform or application? Can the law deal with mental privacy as a human right outside of traditional privacy protections, which are centered around identity? At this point, the metaverse resembles earlier forms of the internet, early online platforms like America Online and Netscape and Prodigy, platforms where anonymity was not at issue. You would log in with a verifiable billing address that was connected to your username. So the platforms knew who you were. Privacy law online became centered around protecting your personal identifying information. And I've argued in works that I've written and published in law journals that that's not what is at risk when we look at the metaverse. I developed a term called biometric psychography. And this is when your bodily measurements, so for example, your pupil dilation or your facial geometry or the way that you move is recorded. And these measurements are fundamental to making your XR hardware work. They're required, or the hardware can't function. If this type of information were to be combined with advertising or another monetization scheme, it would be the like button on steroids. So biometric psychography is the marriage of your bodily feedback with your likes, dislikes, and preferences, and having that be used to create inferences about your behavior, your preferences, and your health. Should an action that could be considered biometric psychography be permissible? As of now, there aren't restrictions on the use, storage, and sale of this type of material in a way that could implicate advertising. Truth in advertising standards don't apply. Many people are starting to think about privacy and safety and other legal related issues in the metaverse, but I would argue that we need to think about fundamental human rights and how those need to adapt to new environments. Will biometric psychography be permitted? Or is targeted advertising based on biometric feedback and intrusion? Will the right to privacy look the same as it does on the internet? Obviously not. But how we adapt is really the question we should be focusing on. Number 4, illegal activity will lag behind criminal law enforcement. we first saw this trend of technology moving slower than criminal activity on the internet. And the first manifestations came, and you can see this in forums that still exist today, like the dark web. Looking at under-regulated spaces, these type of digital environments will similarly be found in the metaverse. An example of this that I look at is a space related to NFTs. Now, much of the metaverse will become enmeshed with NFTs and other types of cryptocurrencies and digital currencies. With new technology, we find new legal risks. And so this new way to buy and sell goods and new way to garnish authority will bring new legal risks, both to users and to platforms. If you look at the development of some of these NFT regimes, it's really been characterized by fraud, and not new kinds of fraud, but applications in a new space. So you'll see things like Ponzi schemes or pump and dump schemes or unenforceable promises made by developers and platforms. And the recourse that currently is in place for NFT-related fraud is using physical contract law. There's a lack of clarity at this point about how this will translate into the metaverse. If somebody sells you a digital property, does property law apply, or is it governed by contract law? At this point, most people think contract law will be the applicable scheme. But what characteristics from property law will we carry over? This transference of different legal regimes from one topical area and one area of governance to another is fundamental to thinking about metaverse law. Clarity is needed in these areas. For example, right now there is a large lack of clarity about how NFT functions if you look at the general populace. People are often surprised when I tell them NFTs are a licensing regime, and you don't own the digital asset. You get a license to use and enjoy the asset. It's not direct ownership. It's like purchasing a song off of iTunes. You don't own exclusive rights to the song, but you're allowed to listen to it and play it as much as you want. Looking at how NFTs will integrate into monetization systems, into digital property, into the way that people will conduct business in the metaverse is an area that I'm looking at quite carefully. And so these new monetization schemes and new schemes with decentralized areas of authority are very promising in one regard, but on the other hand, they create an enforcement gap. So users and platforms need to be aware of this and how that can expose them to both legal and reputational risk. Number 5. Based on everything we've said, lawyers will have challenges advising on legal risks due to uncertainties. For example, there are certain terms that, as of yet, remain undefined in relation to the metaverse. If you look at social media, user-generated content has a very explicit meaning. But if you go to the metaverse, UGC or organic content, like exists on social media, doesn't exist in the same way. In the metaverse, I would argue that user-generated content can be environmental or even architectural, as assets are created for use, sale, and functionality within digital worlds. And we create the walls and the confines and the laws of physics and functionality within new digital spaces. Are those user-generated content? Is it more than just written or visual, pictorial, video, or audio-based content like it is on the web? I would argue yes, but it's uncertain if the law would agree. Looking at different areas like the definition of home in the metaverse. Privacy law gives special protections to the term home under the Fourth Amendment. Will we have a reasonable expectation of privacy in our metaverse home? Does it matter if it's a digital twin of our physical home or not? Looking at issues like content moderation, it has to be different than social media. 3D content moderation in the metaverse needs 3 dimensions: content, conduct, and environment. How will laws like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which provide intermediary liability for platforms on the internet, apply to the metaverse? Human rights challenges, as we talked about before in relation to privacy, are going to find new forms that will overlap and intersect. For example, in the metaverse, access to information will be a key issue. Now, access to information in regard to online spaces has previously centered on connectivity. When you translate this to digital worlds, however, we will find that this fundamental human rights will find itself challenged more fundamentally by the digital divide when you're looking at both connectivity and access to information in an entirely new form. Moving on to other protections under international law. There are certain offenses in international law that are called jus cogens. And by this, I mean a fundamental group of international norms from which sovereigns or states may not derogate. These will be against the law in any country and under any government. And they include things like genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, piracy, slavery, and torture. My question is the metaverse a space beyond international law? Will actions like this be permissible in the metaverse if there's not the same loss of life or liberty to individuals, but there is an impact on human dignity? Finally, looking at precepts of international human rights law centered around accessibility. If the fundamental design of XR hardware does not allow for full accessibility for groups like women, ethnic and religious minorities, and people with apparent and non-apparent disabilities, how is this going to be a metaverse for all? If you look at some of the original hardware designs, for example, without an adjustable interpupillary distance, people with smaller heads, primarily women, find themselves outside of the group that the headsets were originally designed for. And it's like wearing the wrong pair of glasses. So women tend to get more motion sickness and simulator sickness than men when going through metaverse-related properties. And it's because of this design flaw. It wasn't designed for people with different body shapes and different headgear or physical disabilities in mind. We need this to be a metaverse for all. And this taps in to human rights protections and human rights frameworks. Overall, a fundamental legal framework for the metaverse has yet to be developed. I would argue that at this point, it's necessary. And we should be thinking philosophically as well as pragmatically about what is the function of law, what manner of enforcement regime is needed to make law work, and what substantive and procedural protections are required to ensure that this authority does not overreach. This makes it an exciting time to practice law related to the metaverse, and a bit of a volatile time to develop and participate in digital worlds. Thank you for listening to me today. I'm looking forward to seeing how both the letter and the spirit of the law apply to the metaverse and listening to all the speakers today. May our gather be well, and thank you.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the GatherVerse Legal and Governance Summit roundtable discussion on data, commerce, safety and privacy, and what do we need to know? We've assembled a group of experts, those who are in the celestial forest, chopping this wood on the metaverse and emerging technologies when it comes to this subject and more. What we'll do is we'll have each participant introduce themselves, and then we'll proceed forward with a very intimate, thorough, and what's sure to be a thoughtful discussion of exploration on what are the next steps that we're looking at when it comes to legal, policy, and the eyes of experts, of technologists, and those who are explorers in the GatherVerse community. Stacy, let's start with you and move over to Laura and so forth.
Great. Good morning and good afternoon, because I am based in Canada. So I am the president and founder of Stellar Group, Inc., and I am a public policy professional and looking forward to participating in the discussion.
Good morning. My name is Laura Brown. I'm Director of Training and Education for Oracle's local government team, where we focus on public safety and public administration.
Hey, good morning. My name is Jared Arms. I'm the founder and CEO of Collar.io and a child sex trafficking advocate.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Christopher, for your introduction. I'm really glad to be here with all these experts. I'm Juan Sebastián. I'm a Colombian lawyer. I have dedicated my career to corporate law, and currently I'm starting an LLM in law of internet technology, precisely trying to discuss these kind of topics and to understand what the legal framework for the metaverse should be.
Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. And shall we begin? Panel, I have to ask, as the first opening question, which I find it to be very intriguing. It may seem a bit bland and vanilla, but I think it's critically important to ask, what concerns you about the metaverse? We'll open it up.
All right. Well, I'll start with three of the things that I'm focusing on is identity management, harassment and assault, and protecting the youth. So I guess we can piggyback off those three, but those are like some of my top three concerns right now.
And to add to Jared, mine would be the increase of digital racism. Many of you may have heard that the N-word increased on Twitter by an exponential amount ever since the new owner took over. So if it's happening currently on social media, what's going to happen in the metaverse when people can now hide behind an avatar? So that's one of my main concerns as well.
Juan, let's unmute your mic, sir.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Of course.
Okay, yeah. So as a lawyer, in addition to Jared's and Stacy's concern, which has, of course, at the center of our work as lawyers, one of my concerns currently is that the metaverse and Web3 in general are unfortunately very far away from the legal world, or rather, the legal world is very far away from the metaverse. So I've been in the last months in a couple of conference of lawyers from all around the world, and it's shocking that there is not a very good understanding of what the metaverse is, and the law is not yet asking itself necessary questions to make sure that these new environments are safe and that they can safeguard precisely topics such as the ones explained by Jared and Stacy. So my main concern is lack of knowledge by the part of lawyers, of policymakers, and also by the users in general that are entering into this new environment with not a lot of knowledge, and then being more exposed to the dangers of the digital reality.
Laura.
I can follow on that. So as an educator, I'm very much concerned about the amount of data that we're collecting within these systems and how it's being used to feed specific types of content and information to influence people's thoughts and behaviors and other things, both for advertising and other purposes.
Let's start with data and let's leap into that. Laura, coming back to you, What's the importance and the relevancy of data when it comes to the metaverse and emerging technologies contemporary to our time?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the metaverse or immersive technologies, what folks may not realize is all of the data that goes into making these experiences so feature rich and so immersive. The things that we're tracking, like just what position you're looking within the headset in terms of how we feed content to you, collecting other things like where your pupils are looking or how dilated they are, where your hands and legs are moving, or what the inside of your house looks like. This is data and information that we may not be even mindfully passing into a company's servers, or we may not be aware of how that data is being used because we're scrolling through terms and agreements and not really reading into the details. And we may be having experiences that are driven by that data that we're not aware of either. So I think having kind of a public education initiative around how this data has been used for decades now in social media and other channels is really important before we move into the next frontier with whole other layers of biometric and other forms of data.
Indeed. Stacy, jumping to you. Policy. From the lens of policy, what does data mean?
So, I mean, data is something that those who are providing this content and the data should have the control over their data, but they don't, because as Laura said, you kind of just skim through the agreements, you kind of give away all this information about yourself. And so from a government policy, like we need to ensure that there's some best practices to structure how this data can be used, us educating to those, the consumers or participants, helping us to understand how it'll be used, who will have access to it, and then the power to request to remove our data. So for example, in Canada, we have something called the Digital Charter of Rights, and this is kind of the first somewhat of a legal framework that's allowing those of us who are participating in these digital spaces to have some type of rights, and it's governed by 10 principles. It seemed fairly fair, but the challenge is the enforcement of it. And that's like with how the legal system has always been. Like law may sound good in theory, it doesn't apply equally to everybody. Policies don't apply equally to everybody because your social and economic status plays a factor in it. And so when it comes to whose data is being mined and how it's being mined, there's certain parts of the world where if you're lower on the economic scale, or you have less rights, or you have a legal structure that doesn't protect you as much, or you don't have the strong privacy legislation in place, then your data is allowed to be exploited in a different way or in a very unethical way, more than other countries where there are stronger places, stronger policies in place, like in Europe, for example. They have really strong privacy legislation compared to other countries. Canada is not too bad as well.
Stacy, hold that thought. We'll jump back to you. I do have a follow-up with that in just a moment. But Juan, I have a real concern. I see what's happening in the evolution and development and growth when it comes to avatars. Avatars, hyper-realistic avatars. When we start to think about anatomically the body, the head cavity, chest cavity, lower abdominal cavity, extremities, the body movement, as it was just expressed about the tracking, I have a real concern, Juan, about my body, my likeness, my imagery within the metaverse itself, and the ownership of my biometrical data. One, why do I have this concern? Please, your mic.
Sorry about that. So your concern is absolutely legitimate. I think is the concern of all people that are related to the metaverse and in principle of lawyers. Because as Laura was saying, even before coming into these immersive realities, and as Stacy was pointing out, the ownership of data is a very important part of the whole story. Because in Web 2, one of the characteristics of Web 2, of this internet of platforms of Facebook, Google, these big companies, is that actually data is actually owned by these companies and not by the users themselves. So this is something that spaces like GatherVerse, in which we're trying to make this environment healthier for users and for society as a whole, is what we have to work towards to, and is to make that users are actually the owners of their own data and of their information. So for example, what you're referring to of these avatars that are super realistic, hyper realistic, in which your face, your body has a digital representation in the metaverse, should be only yours and not of maybe a big company or other people around. However, this also raises concerns that are present even in the real world. For example, when celebrities have to face paparazzis and these kind of things, in which they want to own their own image, their own person, that they are exposed to being photographs in the street, being even harassed in the streets. So are we willing to let this happen also in the metaverse, or are there concerns that we should be asking ourselves when we are trying to construct the regulatory framework for the metaverse? And even so, taking point on your question, also in the space of artificial intelligence, for example, in which you are sharing lots of even intimate information with, for example, chatbots, in which you have like a companion, a friend who is an artificial intelligence, with whom you share a very intimate personal data, and it's important to understand this. And the law, unfortunately, has always have the characteristic of being much slower than the technological developments. So it's important that we as lawyers, as policymakers, we catch up with the advancements of technology to keep pace and to react and to build a legal environment that can make the metaverse healthy.
Sure. Jared, let's jump onto the other side, the dark side, if you will, when it comes to data. You're doing really yeoman's work. Blockchain, time stamped data. Data can be used in great ways, but we also see data, unfortunately, used in very unbecoming ways. And innovation is quite on the path of a bifurcation. We see innovation that is great, innovation that's used for good, but also in the minds of technologists, innovation certainly is used for bad. Data, what are you seeing when it comes to data on a different narrative than what most people are seeing out there, Jared, from your lens?
Yeah, great question. So one thing that I'm doing right now is taking the time to consult with different attorneys and lawyers. At first, some of the problems were like trademark and copyright and IP, but moving towards like unlawful content, terroristic messages, illegal explosive purchases, of course, child exploitation from all ranges to even animal abuse. But like there's this case with this guy that named John Woo out in South Korea. It was like the largest child pornography site that was funded by Bitcoin. It was taken down by the feds, I believe, in 2018. But then there's other people, like people in Germany. Guy got caught last year with 500 terabytes worth of child pornography, which is 34 years worth of video content, if you want to just know how big of amount of data that is. And some of these hard drives or these disks aren't always being cracked. They just have access to them now. On another note, when we're talking about like the dark web, like I was mentioning last time, 9 times out of 10, most people won't download like browsers like Tor and things like that. They'll use the commercial browsers. But the problem, technically, what's going on right now, where like I see like this new connection starting to happen, usually unless you are accessing those like encrypted browsers, you really won't access like 90% of the dark web. But with these blockchain domains, people can now create unlawful type of platforms that can be accessible in what we call the clear net, the 10% that Google, Chrome, IE, Safari, these browsers can access. On another note, when we're talking about the criminals that's trying to not get caught, you know, the feds can still get the IP address from Tor, OpenSea, MetaMask. MetaMask can still control wallets and things like that to a degree. So when you have these criminals that's going completely, basically, it's like a trend of I don't want to, let me just talk. Basically, like a trend of criminals that's starting to de-Google their phones to where they're like bypassing like the IMEI connections, making like all type of GPS to a certain degree like incompatible or disabled. So when you remove like the operating system from the phone and use something that's more hardened, to say the least, to connect with those type of decentralized networks, it makes it much harder to connect. And even like when the Fed send out those 2 subpoenas to Signal with companies that's not recording information like a Google or a Facebook, is really, it's not impossible, but it's much harder to track these people because now you have these decentralized, well, you have these centralized companies that are starting to build these decentralized chat applications that they don't store all of the information stored within the nodes. So not only is it like kind of like hard to identify like where the stuff is being hosted, but like even thinking about artificial intelligence, they have they have like artificial intelligence child pornography out there, where it's not necessarily real people, but it would look like it's real people and stuff. And I don't think that's illegal to create artificial intelligence child pornography and to sell it. So looking at like what they trying to do to, okay, well, of course it's still going down with the real people, but I'm starting to see this trend. And, you know, some of these websites, you know, you have communities of pedophile moms that's out there right now on the dark web offering over $5,000 in cryptocurrency for men to come and rape their 2 and 3 year olds. This is public information, and it's tens of thousands of mothers. You have men that's requesting, can they snuff the kid after they done, which is to kill the baby, and they like, you got to pay us more. All of this is public information, but on some of these networks you can't take it down, and it's a little disturbing. So
Sure.
The tricky part is, it's like, to enter some of these websites, you have to actually upload some very abusive content now, and legally, I don't think our government can do that. So that makes it a little bit more harder to crack, because again, with everything being stored in on a decentralized network, it's not a single point of failure where you can go and attack, like for an adult sharing platform or something like that. Or if you could just go on YouTube or WorldStar or even Pornhub.com to see all this stuff, is really kind of hard to even know what's going on right now, because most of the companies that's building these new applications aren't storing the videos. So and just to kind of favor like the AI, I do know of developers that's trying to create artificial intelligence to kind of know how to distinct like a scream from maybe a Freddy Krueger movie to an actual real video with some children, and that's very hard to do. Trying to create platforms to where you can search, because like we using tracking analysis and things like that, trying to find just different purchases and see how we can share that with law enforcement. So you know, it's a lot with that type of stuff. But my whole thing right now is like trying to, at the highest level, they are doing it to where they can de-Google their phone and be a part of these platforms to where you can't really track them like that. And then even if you are aware that they may be using these apps like Signal and others, those apps aren't collecting information. So it's like a brick wall.
So Jared, we're going to dive into that a little bit further. And thank you for giving that very vivid and very unfortunate illustration, if you will, of a world that is happening out there that many of us, unfortunately, turn such a blind eye to. For you to step into that line of work, it truly is well regarded. Stacy, governments, Meta policy. Meta has a fleet and a legion of policy people. Governments around the world have a fleet of policy people and lawmakers. But how do they approach? They're used to approaching things that are of a tangible nature, if you will. We're now moving and migrating into an intangible nature and paths we've never been before, to the point where we know, audience, if you're listening, there was a time that a senator, I won't say his name, said, and you can use whatever technology destination that you want in terms of a hub. He said that Silicon Valley, where I'm at, is more advanced in technology than the United States government, which is very true. Now, again, Silicon Valley, Silicon Alley, Silicon Beach, Prairie, name your place. Let's not limit it here to Silicon Valley. But I would submit, and to the audience and to those that are with us today, and to technologists and experts that are joining us here on this panel, what happens when the technology becomes more advanced than the technologist? Now, if the technology is already at an advanced, rapid level as we have never seen before, Stacy, I have to ask, what are the approaches for policy to be able to hold on something that's moving so fast? How do they write and legislate and keep up with this type of traction?
I mean, I would say it's important to start with the most harm that it's causing and literally create legislation that makes things illegal. Like, we can't compromise when it comes to protecting the rights of children, especially as Jared outlined, a very dark things that are happening in the real world and now going into this metaverse. And so there are loopholes. The regulations aren't strong enough. The accountability is not strong enough. We also have a world of lobbying that allows essentially for corporations to essentially own certain senators and governments. And there needs to be a law to make that more difficult for the type of fundraising that they can do and the type of donations that some of these big corporations can cut that allows them to build and be so big legally by jumping through loopholes with how they lobby. And so I think it really needs to start with a proper assessment of where the loopholes are, how we can tighten regulation. I mean, we know that even with the facial recognition technology, there's some aspects of it that had to be removed because it was really being used to police and surveillance people, and people were being misidentified and criminalized. And so there had to be some lobbying from nonprofits organizations says this actually has to end. And I do believe that we, the people, have the power, and these things won't work unless we subscribe to it, unless we participate to it. Like if we walk away from social media has no business. It's not necessarily the corporations or the advertisers that's keeping these platforms rich. It's us who are using it. And the corporations are paying for the attention economy that we're giving it. So I think as a society, like we also have to do a self-assessment as to what we're going to say yes to. And just because something can be done, it doesn't mean it should be done. It doesn't mean we should participate in it. And we really have to start with making sure there's laws that protect the most vulnerable among us, of course, starting with children, people with disabilities, people with, different challenges in life and different barriers. And we just don't have strong enough legislators who have the lived experience to understand how critical it is. Because if you lived in a glass house and you're making these policies, you don't understand how real it is for people who are in poverty, who are going through human trafficking, who are victims of these things, because you've never lived it. You may not even have a friend or anybody in your network. So it's not a priority. Like it's not a pressing issue. We're like, we have to end this through legislation. We have to have tough laws. So it's a tough balancing act with making sure we have policies that have the best practices, that is, properly governed for the least among society, because it's those who get elected usually come from very high economic backgrounds. They have a certain privilege. And so they're disconnected from the real issues, and it's just not pressing enough. So we have to keep raising alarm bells. The work Jared is doing is amazing. Like that, the advocates are really the ones who can kind of shape this, because they have to remind everybody in society to know these are the critical issues. This is why it matters. And then we have to elect people who genuinely care about these issues and will commit to doing good by the people. So that's just my insight on where we could at least start.
And if I can add in one thing, Chris, before we hop on,
Please.
With the SB 145 that was passed, the bill in California, December 2020, what that does is enable judges, basically for 14 through 17-year-olds who's given consensual anal or oral intercourse with adults of an age range up to 10 years of age range. So basically, I'm sure we all can agree that a 24-year-old should not have oral or anal or vaginal intercourse with a 14-year-old nor a 15-year-old. Before the SB 145 bill was passed, judges only had the right, I guess, to make a decision if it was vaginal, but oral and anal by default, they had to register as a sex offender. But with this SB 145, now judges can make the decision if they have to register as a sex offender or not for oral or anal intercourse. And I think that's an important law or bill that we should focus on in a huge stack of other ones. But that's something recently that kind of bothered me. It makes the problem a little bit harder when you catching these men or women having sexual acts with minors, and then you have certain bills that may be in favor just due to people giving consent to a degree.
Thank you for sharing, Jared. It certainly does speak to a lot of the obstacles that were met when it comes to the law, and we will dovetail on that some more, Juan. But before we go there, Laura, I really want to bring this opportunity and to follow up with what Stacey had just made mention of in regards to policy. Laura, you're an expert on many things, including that of education and training. Education has, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that education must take precedence.
Mm-hmm.
It's our third standard of the 7 standards of the Metaverse with GatherVerse, if you will. But it seems that education must take precedence to be able to even educate policy correctly, to execute and to give good policy, even those of our legal practitioners. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing a really large gap. I think we've got a very sizable gap that we've had for probably the last 2 decades. Honestly, it's not like these are new problems. This all started once the internet kind of became fully social and interactive, even with chat rooms. We remember ASL back in the 90s, trying to dig into kids' personal lives and find out where they are. Grooming has been a huge issue for a very long time. Sharing child pornography has been an issue for a very long time. And we really haven't seen any major concerted efforts to snuff any of that out. It's continued. It's been pervasive. Stacey's points on which communities it's impacting has a lot to do with that. Impoverished, under-resourced communities continue to be very disproportionately hit by these types of things. I don't think that we've seen yet kind of an interconnectedness to all of the other societal ills and problems that we're having because of this. We have domestic violence issues on the law enforcement side that we're dealing with that's kind of creating these almost economies of crime that the metaverse and online communities are just exacerbating incredibly. These are tools that can be used for great things and tools that can be used for really, really horrible things, as Jared is helping us understand today. I think having a core curriculum, we don't see public education talking about how to keep kids safe. We're not teaching kids how to keep themselves safe. We're not teaching young adults how to keep themselves safe against things like rape culture, porn culture. These have been very expensive issues to litigate, very challenging crimes to litigate. The digital evidence trails are very complicated. The more that we can start to think about this on a holistic level and re-empower our individual communities with education, I think that these policy measures are going to be a lot easier to pass, because right now we have an uneducated population in a lot of these communities. They don't even know what we're talking about. Yet they've been seeing the impacts of it for a very long time.
Indeed. One, virtual harassment, prosecuting. How do we take that approach? But let me add a bit of a caveat to this. Let's say criminal and civil, let's say litigation. There's a host of things that are happening in the metaverse, if you will, extended reality, XR, virtual reality, augmented reality. There's a host of things that are happening. Look, we've become more virtual in the past 31 months than we have the past 31 years. And we're not going back. We're only moving forward. We're ingressing into virtual environments. We saw a great presentation that was presented by Meta, Accenture, Microsoft, into the world of enterprise unlike any way that we've ever seen an active environment of commerce. We know that where financial transactions and buy, sell, and trade, ecologically, where that happens, we know, unfortunately, that there will be and that there is criminal activity. We know that in community centralization, there is harassment, that we won't be naive to say that maybe it will happen. We know that in any given opportunity, unfortunately, harassment is a thing that's present. But how do we abstain? How do we prosecute on a number of different levels when it comes to activities that are happening in the metaverse? Interpol, when it comes to law enforcement, has been getting involved now when it says, hey, the metaverse, we need to be there. We can't afford just to be online, if you will. We're talking something that's very, very different. What's that path look like, Juan, if you will?
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. Well, also taking point on what Laura says, I think that these aren't necessarily new problems because we have had these kind of situations with older technology. But of course, as technology evolves, the problem becomes more serious. And I think that the central problem for the law, besides creating regulation, which I believe is actually there in the sense that rules condemning sexual harassment and these kinds of behaviors, pedophilia, etc., it exists. However, the problem is how do governments are able to enforce in reality these kind of rules. I think there are two main problems concerning enforcement in internet, in the metaverse concretely. First is the identity of the aggressor. It is oftenly very hard to understand who the person who is committing the crime is, because in these environments it's very easy to create like a fake identity or identity that gives no clues whatsoever on the whereabouts and on the identity of the person who is committing the crime. So this is a first challenge and a first difficulty that enforcement of this kind of rules meet. And the second one is the cross-border nature of the internet and of the metaverse, which makes very hard for a government to prosecute a crime. Because let's be in a scenario in which a government is able to identify the aggressor, but that person is, I don't know, in a country in Asia in which, for example, a Latin American country, which is a country in which, in this example, might be the child that have been harassed online, does not have any kind of international treaty to which cooperate with that particular Asian government in order to um, really prosecute the crime overseas. So I think that one of the challenges that we have as lawyers is trying to create a cross-border environment of international treaties between nations to being able to prosecute um, these crimes, even if they happen at other parts of the world. That as lawyers, for example, but also from the part of technicians, it's important to develop better technologies to understand and to grasp the identity of the people that are committing the crimes in order to being able to tackle these crimes that happen online. I think that if technicians and lawyers are able to surpass these two challenges, the metaverse would be a much safer place for people to go to. Also, adding the very important part of education also to elderly people, for example. I think that in the context of cryptocurrencies, there are hundreds of cases of elder people who do not necessarily understand the environment in which they are investing, and that they tend to lose all of their savings in a place that they do not understand. So I think that education, as Laura was mentioning, is key, and making this education available for different kinds of populations.
Stacy, governments globally, is it feasible? Is it grounded in reality to think that governments, transmetropolitan, if you will, city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, if you will, is it reasonable to think that governments can come together to be able to help find some type of unification or unity, if you will, in regulating an environment, a governmental path, and helping regulate this governmental path of a metaverse that does not and is not bound and restricted to physical borders? What does that look like moving forward for governments to come together to be able to regulate the single or the singular metaverse?
I mean, it would be extremely difficult considering that government can barely protect international human rights laws. When you think of the labor laws as it is, there's a reason why there's some, what you call it, companies getting labor. There's a term for it where you outsource your labor at a cheaper cost to mass produce the products that they sell to us at record profits. And a lot of that includes the laptops and the tech gadgets that we're using right now. So we know that, sweatshops are still a reality, and we still can't even regulate that. So I see these digital spaces as a reflection of the real world. And the more that we're able to make the real world better, we'll have a better reflection. Like when we see digital racism and these things happening, well, it's happening in the real world, right? And so the law is already having a hard time holding big corporations and certain parties accountable for breaking international laws, breaking international treaties that Juan talked about. There are treaties in place for a lot of different groups across the globe. They're not really being adhered to. So I think that would be a really challenge. And one of the things we have to be mindful of is this Western perspective onto so-called undeveloped parts. And I call them so-called undeveloped parts of the world because historically we know what has happened to countries that have made them undeveloped. But when we think of how, these companies are based in Silicon Valley in California and they're expanding globally, but they're also coming with their ideologies and their perspectives and what they think the law should look like onto these other countries that also have their own customs, their own traditions, their own practices, and their own way of how they think perhaps the metaverse should be governed. So the meeting of the minds will be very challenging because, country by country, even state by state in America, things are very different because of the political ideologies and all these other different practices that people have. So getting to that middle ground will be very challenging. But then you have the Western society that has the upper hand because the amount of wealth that they can, that they're earning through the system and kind of imposing their ideology on these other countries, mining the data of these other countries because everybody's kind of subject to quote unquote big tech system that they're building. And so this is where we're going to have a challenge with having a very fair and equitable and balanced metaverse legal structure, because the current legal structure already has a bunch of flaws and doesn't work across international lines as it is. But I think if we spent more time trying to fix that and make that better, it will give us a better framework for how we could move forward in this kind of innovation age of the metaverse.
Indeed, Stacy. For those that are with us and joining us, Walter J. McMath has just hard in with us. We're playing an incredible dance, a double dutch, if you will, Walter. And so be prepared to leap in. Let's bring it in. And we have a lot more to, in a little bit of time more. Well, say that we've had a very interesting and intriguing discussion on harassment, a discussion on policy, discussion on legal. But the question I will levy and put to you is, what concerns you about the metaverse, Walter?
Man, how much time do we have left? Thanks for having me, Chris. And boy, howdy, there are so many things that concern me. Actually, this was the part that I told myself I had to try to hem myself in a little bit rather than running wild. Generally speaking, I have great concerns about accessibility in general. I see the metaverse very much like a public utility, like things that we've deemed that most people need to have access to, like for example the library, like certain public services, like certain legal services. And I have great concerns that like some of these services, the metaverse is going to be price rationed, that people that have more money are going to get a better version. Obviously, there's just been a discussion about harassment, and that is a huge concern to me as well. For a lot of the reasons that were just mentioned, people are people and sometimes engage in that behavior. Uh, One thing that greatly concerns me about the metaverse, and this is going to be kind of an unconventional position, is I worry about hacking, and not just technological hacking. I'm talking about neurological hacking. We got people that are wearing devices that literally beam information directly into their brains. And this is a level of psychological access that has not been possible up until this point. And again, bad actors are just always a possibility. And so while it's great to be able to put on a headset and have the feeling of contemporaneous presence with somebody 3,000 miles away, there are downsides to that. Somebody may try to flash a light pattern at you and create a seizure indication. Someone might try to mess with your reflexes or create some subconscious association for you. It's a brave new world, and we do ourselves no favors if we don't look at the bad possibilities as well as the good.
Follow-up question, Walter. What are the legal implications of what we're looking at when it comes to this?
Great question. So of course it's going to depend on what specifically we're talking about. Like so let's use the flashing lights seizure example that I used. So generally speaking, until the metaverse gets its own legal system, and I think that's going to be a long time coming, because that's going to require a lot of cooperation amongst a lot of different agencies, when, as Stacy said, there's already a lot of issues with that. We're going to have to work with the system that we have in place. So if I'm sitting here in California, somebody flashes lights in my headset and charges and causes me to have a seizure, I'm physically located somewhere. That person is physically located somewhere. Our existing legal systems create rules for that. If we're both in the same locale, okay, I can go after that person locally. I can have my local law enforcement department deal with that person. I can have local prosecutors deal with that. If this person is in a different jurisdiction in my same state, okay, there are processes for that. I'm probably going to have to go through some process of discovering who that person is and where they're coming from, and then having their local law enforcement deal with it. If they're in a different state, okay, things get a little bit more complicated. Now I have to find some way to do it federally. Maybe there is a federal crime cause of action that allows me to pursue that. But the bottom line is we're going to have to work within the specific legal systems that already exist for our physical world, at least until the law catches up, which is probably going to take a while because unfortunately, legislation and policy systems are not exactly known for keeping pace with technology.
I have two questions that are coming up. Thank you, Walter. One's coming for your way, Jared, in just a second. But first, I need to ask Laura a question. Laura, law enforcement, government officials, policy, technologists, what a divide. Are technologists doing enough to educate our practitioners, our policy and government officials and law enforcement? Are we doing enough to be able to educate them on what it is that we're building and huddled in hacker spaces, in laboratories, in garages? Are we doing enough?
I mean, obviously, I'm going to say no, because I always think there's more opportunity, and there's a huge landscape of knowledge that we don't have right now within law enforcement. To Walter's point, I'm working with local law enforcement myself. We're focused on local issues. We're focused on local problems. When we've got teenagers reporting somebody harassing them that's in another state or in another country, many of us have not trained on how to respond to that. We don't know how to deal with those things. We're getting 911 calls through admin lines, even wellness checks that are coming through from Twitch streaming or YouTube Live, people that are concerned and actually seeking out local law enforcement contact to try to get people help. And even then, we're not quite sure how to render aid. We don't know what the relationship is to the individual. We don't know if this is real or not. We don't know if it's deceptive. We've got swatting that we're dealing with. We've got false evidence that we're dealing with. There's a lot of issues that we're kind of having to wrap our heads around right now as it is. No, technology companies are not generally creating, educational packets for law enforcement to help us navigate these challenges. And we're not even sure what challenges they're creating. So safety by design, privacy by design frameworks are a great way for companies to help us understand what they're doing, so that if we do have a case that comes across our desk, which is happening with increased frequency, we at least know what we're working with. We know what Twitch is. We know what, YouTube live streaming is. We know what an Instagram story is. Those kind of comprehensive programs have not yet been developed and deployed for law enforcement. That's something that we definitely need.
Thank you, Laura. Jared, real quick, the bridge to law enforcement and technologists, you're working with some, you have worked with some, the FBI in particular, in dealing when it comes to a number of issues. What does that relationship look like? Your mic, sir.
I'm sorry. So another thing that before I got in more aware of the trafficking situation, which that's been historical part of our country for quite some time now. So, but we also focus on decreasing gun violence. I lost a huge amount of friends due to gun violence growing up in St. Louis, Missouri. So by trying to decrease gun violence, by increasing STEM awareness, we've partnered with law enforcement for about 6 years now. And what we'll do, we have different workshops, but one fun thing is creating like a non-violent video game workshop where we partner with game development companies, local partners such as like Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, etc. And we'll teach the students and the officers how to create non-violent video games. And especially at the horrific event with Mike Brown in 2014, we want to humanize the community aside from just, putting out more negative energy and things like that. We also partner with St. Louis Family Court Systems, work with the juvenile students. So sometimes we may not be able to access the students on site at school, but being able to connect with them within the jail systems is super important because, some of them a lot of these young girls and boys have unfortunate backgrounds and do crimes just for survival purposes. So to be able to connect with them and teach them some positive skills to make a more promising future financially, that's super important for me. So it's one thing to talk about it, but to actually make sure that we train these young people not to grow up and be monsters is super big. And yeah, bringing law enforcement in is just super awesome. just on that note.
Indeed. Thank you, Jared. Juan, Walter, legal practitioners, explorers, if you will, the law. The law is never firmly settled, is it? There's always the law, for those that are with us, it evolves just like technology evolves. There's nothing fixed and never truly permanent, is there? We're seeing laws here, in particular in the United States, being changed that have been a way of life that we've known for some of us our whole entire lives. So we know that things are evolving and changing, if you will, the winds of war. One, I have to ask, in the face of the attorney lens, what is the biggest obstacle that you see that you believe that all attorneys will be confronted with, that you could say is more universal and not necessarily geared towards specific to the location? And let me add the caveat that Britton Heller, who gave us our opening keynote presentation, which he did a wonderful job, expressed many of the sentiments that have been conveyed today. And they were more so questions and things that we may need to start taking a look at and concerned, because what I'm gathering right now today is that we have a whole lot of questions. We have a lot of untied shoes, and we don't have enough solution yet. And it seems to me there's just something that's just percolating in my mind, matriculating, if you will, that it seems to me with the billions of dollars and the millions of dollars that are being applied towards creating these incredible platforms of technology out there, perhaps we create a little bit of a nook and cranny of a dollar or so to be able to contribute towards educating those that will be using these platforms. Mark Zuckerberg, we enjoy what you're building. We're not against it, but we hope that you're listening. I know that your policy people are with us today. I hope that they're taking notes, as they should be, to say, hey, maybe we need to start allocating a little bit of budget towards educating those who can help manage what you are building, that will undoubtedly, of this expected perhaps $13 to $14 trillion economy that will arrive at our shores by 2030 is the forecast of Citi and other forecasters. We need to start thinking about those that are only building it in the consumer level, but on the enterprise, and how this impacts ecologically the whole entire world. Juan, what is the great concern universally for legal?
Well, the great concern for legal is precisely getting lawyers to be closer to technology, and also technologies to be closer to lawyers, because as of now, I think there is a huge divide between the two worlds, and lawyers worldwide have like a very strong resistance towards trying to learn new things and trying to understand technology in a more technical way. We as lawyers prefer to only refer to our laws, our rules, to do what we know to do what we are comfortable with. But we are often scared about trying to reach out to something that is different, to something that might be, in a way, kind of opposite in the way that you work with, such as technology and law. So I think that as a few decades ago, it happened with economic analysis of law from the Chicago School, in which they brought together the law and the economics. And I think that nowadays lawyers have like a very strong economics training that enables them to tackle problems in fields such as corporate law, having this economics view, even technical economics view, makes easier for lawyers, both policymakers and attorneys at law firms, and also in-house lawyers, to better give advice and to better design public policies towards these kind of problems. So I think that, as it happened before with law and economics, I think that something similar should happen with law and technology, and having lawyers being trained even from law school in technology from a technical point of view. Because if a lawyer does not understand the technical issues of the internet, of the metaverse, the lawyers cannot do anything to create better policy, to better enforce the rules, or even to create new regulation concerning the issues that are faced in the metaverse.
Indeed. Walter, is it reasonable to suggest that we'll begin to see a fleet, if you will, of legal practitioners that will specifically be earmarked and dedicated toward understanding and practicing laws when it comes to the metaverse and emerging technology, sir? Your mic, sir.
Chris, I think it is reasonable to expect, and if anything, I dare say that this is a niche that I've been working to carve out. I think that we absolutely need lawyers that are well versed with technological issues. And even before the metaverse, this is a space that I've tried to occupy. In the criminal courts, for example, a lot of the evidence that is presented already depends on arcane technical issues. How does a mass spectrometer work? How does a gas chromatograph work? Explain to me about DNA testing. Not only does mastery of the law mean that you have to have a working understanding of these various issues, but on top of that, you've got to be able to distill them down to a third grade level. That's what being an effective communicator means. Whether you're talking to a jury, whether you're talking to a judge that doesn't check his own email and wants to have, say, an administrative assistant print them out for him so he can read them in paper form. The bottom line is there absolutely has to be a nexus of communication between the technical and the legal side. And I think, as you hinted before, Chris, it goes both ways. I think that the technical side needs to start to have a grasp of how the technology that they're creating attaches to the legal system. Because at the end of the day, these things are being used by people. And that's what the law does, really, at the end of the day. It describes how people interact and what ways people can interact that are prescribed, that are allowed, that we want, and what ways people can interact that are proscribed, that we want to keep them from doing. And the metaverse is just not going to be any different. It's another way for people to interact for good or for bad.
Stacy, thank you, Walter. Stacy, let's migrate this same question, but with a policy lens. Universally, what are we looking at when it comes to some of the big, a twofold, if you will? What are the biggest obstacles that you perceive that policy will be confronted with universally when it comes to the metaverse and emerging technologies? And what is a solution that's more grounded in reality, that's practical moving forward? We enjoy what policy does. Let me make sure I put that out there. We benefit often from a lot of the things that policy, as the great intermediaries of companies, help to navigate, if you will, between enterprise and consumer. Stacy, what do we have?
So, I mean, there's so many different facets of it. Like, there has to be policies around making sure that we mitigate identity theft around these avatars. Like, there may need to be some rules around it, because I would be concerned as someone who's a consumer online, like, would my avatar be stolen to get access to my financial information for the purpose of the commerce that's going on there? So there has to be some policies for the different types of players that may be on there. When we think about, entertainers and artists and people maybe want to sell their music and do different things on there, like, what is the structure of what that could look like around what's allowed and what does this mean? And so it's going to be requiring a lot of work to develop the right types of policies that's fair, that's implemented in a way that makes sense for how the technology works. Because sometimes you may have a law that sounds good, and then the policies to implement it, and then in the practicality, if you don't understand the technological side of how maybe algorithms work, and then you create this policy that messes up the algorithms, because we're seeing this right now with the type of content we get access to through YouTube on the Canadian side versus what the song streaming company says is considered Canadian content, and what our government says is Canadian content. And so there's a lot of disconnect there, because again, you have policymakers and government people that don't understand the technical side and understand the nuances of how these systems work. So as Laura has said, and as Walter has said, that the education part of it is essential. And we're also missing a very important part when it comes to creating good policy is community engagement. Like, who's consulting the users as to how they want to experience it, how they want to use it? Because you may have these big tech companies talking to their policy and their legal people, but it's the users at the end of the day that they're trying to create good policies for, with maybe good intentions. But how often do we get a chance to be consulted as just the public, as users, to give our insight, so that the policy is not just shaped by those who have all these letters behind their names, but the people who are using the platform, which usually may or may not have letters behind their name. So I think there's also a disconnect with how policy is being shaped, where it's, again, taking out, not including, I should say, the people who are going to be impacted, whether it's the social media platforms that we're on. And there's things that we may have as ideas that, Facebook should do this or Twitter should do that, but we're not being consulted, right? Because we're just not a part of that their companies. So they need to be more engaging with the community. They need to do more outreach. They need to create toolkits to help, the legal system, the law enforcement understand how their systems work, so that it just gives everybody some kind of structure or guidance as to what they can build on, help them to identify loopholes that there may be with some of these systems, because, policy shouldn't be one-sided. It has to be a multidisciplinary approach with multiple perspectives of people to create the best policies for everyone.
Thank you, Stacey. Laura, I have to ask, because I just feel it's so appropriate with some of the yeoman's work that you're doing and have been doing for some time. Everyone's voice has been so complimentary to the subject. Laura, I must ask, when it comes to child safety, safeguards, and we're all here, we're all adults and we're professionals. And if you look at some of the vivid nature that Jared has described and that he experiences and that he's seeing, and we think about it from the legal, if you will, of what Juan and Walter have expressed, and Stacey from policy, we know that the work that we're doing will be passed down to generations to come. That we're setting the tone, if you will, for our children. I have to ask Laura, what is the next step that we should be taking that's proactive and that leads towards more successful narratives, not for us, because we may not be the benefactors of the actions taken today, but of our children and the future generations?
That's a heck of a question. And I think Jared would agree with me, I hope, that at-risk kids have been completely devalued in certain communities. There are people that do not at all care. And some of them are policymakers about the well-being and the thrivability of these young generations, where I can teach them things like boundaries, and I can teach them things like, how to protect yourself. It's not going to matter realistically in a lot of these communities where there is no economy, where crimes are being committed for the ability to survive. I think we have to do a lot of really deep searching within our communities for how to start to address some of these incredibly harsh inequities that we have that are driving kids into lives that they don't really have any choice in making. That's where a lot of our risk is coming from. It is an economic issue. It's a social issue. It's a policy issue. It's a design issue on the part of these companies. I'd say that for the companies, we need to stop designing for just the happy path that we're telling our investors and our shareholders. We need to start being more socially responsible and thinking about the worst case scenario of where this is going to go, and studying these communities more closely. They're big. We're talking about millions of people that are being affected by this, and putting a much brighter light onto these issues that Jared and other groups are focusing on.
Jared, I'd ask the same of you, from the work that you're doing and the wood that you're chopping. How do we help?
Yeah. Everyone's touched on some very important gems. What Laura was saying a couple minutes ago, that far as us as educators, just speaking on my behalf, I do believe that we can do way much more. And like Walter was saying, I've reached out to a few people in the legal space to watch this today on YouTube, just to do my part, because I feel as a technologist, we do need to, make sure that we also build more relationships with people in the legal space and the governments as well. So at the highest level that I think, just consistently educating, but she's right. And I've been speaking to people all throughout this week, over the weekend. It's some very damaged people out here, and it's very unfortunate. And, a lot of people don't care, unfortunately. A lot of families don't like to speak about things like that. Some of these people who were victims, now that they're older, are like, did it really happen or not? But they know it did because they can remember the trauma. So with us trying to connect and partner, I have like a trauma program where we also partner with like social workers and things like that. But aside from even having someone to talk to and vent to, mental health and wellness is very serious. So I think far as just my part, just educate more and just trying to see how we can continue to partner with people in the government and within the legal space to make a difference, because it is something that I'm not personally dealing with, but it does affect me emotionally, and it's very serious and scary, especially knowing the future. It's a lot of bad people out there that I just didn't know about like that. So, and cartels, and of course, there's people within law enforcement, within the FBI that's also taking part in these unfortunate acts. So trying to weed out the right ones too, just not being blinded by a uniform or a title. It's bad people in a lot of those organizations, and that's the more scary part.
And with that said, Jared, Stacy, Laura, Juan, Walter, thank you for taking the time to explore with us. Audience, reach out to them, embrace their culture, embrace the wood that they're chopping, because we all benefit not only by what's been expressed today, but by the work undoubtedly that all of our panelists today have been executing for some time and will be doing in the future. Thank you very much. Good evening.
GatherVerse. My name is James Murphy. I'm a lawyer. I talk about legal issues in the metaverse. Some of you might know me as Meta Lawman on social media channels. I'm delighted to join you today in the GatherVerse. This is going to be fun. Let me start by thanking Christopher Lafayette and his wonderful staff for the opportunity to be with you today. The mission of GatherVerse is to gather the world's communities together to collaborate to create a humanity-centered metaverse. I like that. I'm a big believer in this mission, and I'm optimistic that through Chris's leadership, that mission will be accomplished. I would encourage all of you to take a look at the educational videos that Chris has put up on the GatherVerse site. If you feel like you want to get up to speed on the metaverse in a hurry, that site is a good place to start. So let me start with my lawyer disclaimer. I am a lawyer, but nothing I'm going to say should be taken as legal advice. Please do consult a lawyer if you have any questions about your participation in the metaverse. So I'm going to talk to you today about the law of the metaverse, but we're not going to be talking about all the countries that are starting to take steps toward regulating the metaverse. There's a bunch of great issues there, starting with the question of who's got jurisdiction in the metaverse. But we're not going to talk about that today. Instead, I'm going to talk about a different kind of law. I'm going to talk about the law that governs the relationship between the user of the metaverse platform on the one hand and the owner-operator of the metaverse platform on the other hand. When I say user of a metaverse platform, I am including gamers, developers, artistic content creators, companies doing business or advertising in the metaverse, as well as investors in virtual assets in the metaverse. So when I say user, I mean just about everyone who interacts with a metaverse platform. As I'm sure you all know, there is not one single unitary the metaverse. Instead, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of different metaverse projects out there to choose from. I expect that in a few short years, there will be thousands of metaverses to choose from. When a user enters one of these metaverses, they are almost always asked to check a box on the screen, on the home screen, to agree to terms of service that govern that particular metaverse. You have to check the box to gain access to the metaverse. When you do that, you form an enforceable legal contract with the metaverse operator. Unfortunately, almost nobody reads those terms of service. But whether you read them or not, those terms of service are, in a sense, the law. that will apply in each metaverse, at least for now, until governments in the physical world come in and start to dictate the rules in the metaverse, which I think is probably inevitable. Because so few people in the metaverse actually read the terms of service, we decided that my staff and I at Meta Lawman would take a look at the terms of service for 82 of the largest metaverse platforms operating today. And we released a report with the findings of our study. It's free, and you can access my report on Substack or on my website. What we found in those terms of service was surprising. It surprised me, and I've been a lawyer for a long time. I've seen thousands of contracts. So what's so surprising? Let me give you some examples. When you enter a metaverse, you will find that there are opportunities to buy things. You can buy clothing for your avatar. You can buy tools and implements to help you be more successful in a game. You can buy an NFT sword or shield or skin. And you can even buy virtual land in the metaverse. All of these are generally represented by NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens. So the question you should ask yourself before purchasing virtual assets in the metaverse is, if you buy that NFT, will you actually own that NFT? Now, that seems like a very simple concept, right? Well, here's the surprise. Only about half of the 82 metaverses that we studied make it clear in their terms of service that you own the NFT when you buy it. Others are very clear that you do not own what you buy in that particular metaverse. You can't sell it, you can't modify it, you can't take it with you when you leave the metaverse. You literally have no property rights to the NFT that you bought. Now, that's a minority of the 82, but only half of them make it clear that you do own these assets, and the rest, it's unknown how that will be treated. But many people buy NFTs as an investment. There's a statistic out there that $100 billion were spent on virtual assets in metaverses in 2021. It's $100 billion of investment on various of these metaverse platforms. And some of them say you don't own what you thought you bought, and others are silent on the question, which is a little scary. So anyway, it's a good idea to take a look at the terms of service before you start spending a lot of money on a particular metaverse project. Next question you should ask yourself is, if you're going to build something, if you're an artistic person and you're going to create something, a piece of art to be displayed in an art gallery, or if you're a corporation and you're going to build a store to sell virtual goods or to simply advertise real world goods in a virtual setting, or if you're a company that puts up a casino in the metaverse, these all exist in various metaverse platforms. One of the questions you should ask yourself is whether, under the rules, the law that applies in that metaverse, are you guaranteed continuous, uninterrupted access to your creations? It's a pretty important question. Well, some of them say that the metaverse operator has the right to terminate your access to your account and your access to your virtual assets in your account at any time without notice to you and for no reason. Literally, the words "no reason" are in the terms of service. Now, one has to assume that this isn't happening a lot, that this is a policy that gives them this right, but you don't see it in practice happening a lot. But there's that danger, that right of the metaverse operator to terminate your account and terminate your access to the virtual assets that you have bought, or in this case, built a store, a casino, an art gallery, whatever it might be. So think about it this way. What if in the physical world, a third party could terminate your access to your own home, could prevent you from entering your own home with no prior notice and for no reason at all? What would you pay for that home, even if it was your dream house, if someone had the right to stop you from entering it for no reason at all? So it's something to think about before you make massive investments, whether you're a corporation or an individual investor or creator. Do you have continuous, uninterrupted right of access to your assets on a metaverse platform? Now, fortunately, what I'm describing are some outliers who say they retain the right to terminate your access for no reason, with no notice, etc. So that's a little surprising. Next thing we looked at in our study of the 82 metaverses was, what can you do if something goes wrong with your account or your experience on a particular metaverse platform? What if your NFTs are lost or stolen, or someone defames you or your products, or your copyright or trademark is infringed, or even if you were subject to a physical assault? That's happening in the metaverse as well. That happens. So the question is, what can you do? What are your remedies? Because we know in the physical world, you could sue someone and in court and obtain a remedy. Well, what are the rules in the metaverse? They're different. 32 of the 82 metaverses we studied have explicit limits on the amount of damages that a user can recover from the operator of the metaverse platform in the event of a dispute. And that limit on recoverable damages ranges from $1,000 to a low of just $5. So that is the law in that metaverse, that the maximum recoverable damages of a user who might have their NFTs stolen or might be subject to some other unfortunate circumstance within the metaverse, their damages are limited to $5. Now, that kind of provision is not necessarily enforceable in every state in the United States, but I don't know about all the rest of the countries around the world and whether that's enforceable or not, but you've agreed to it. That is apparently the law in that metaverse, because you have the contract with that metaverse operator that says you agree to this limit in damages. Also, on this topic of what are your remedies, 7 of the metaverses require a user to litigate the dispute that they might have in a foreign country. And by foreign, I mean a non-US country. So one of them requires that if you have a dispute with another avatar on the platform or with the metaverse operator itself, because you were not treated fairly, let's say, you must litigate that dispute in the British territory of Gibraltar, for instance. Others say you have to litigate in the Cayman Islands. You can't go to your neighborhood courthouse and hire a local lawyer and sue someone. You waived that right at the beginning when you check the box saying you agree to the terms of service. Also, in this vein, 30 of the 82 metaverses say that any dispute arising out of conduct or transactions in the metaverse would be governed by the law of a foreign country. And by foreign country, I mean a non-US country. One example is one of these terms of service say any dispute will be governed by the law of New Zealand. So in the event you have a dispute, you'll have to go find yourself a lawyer that is knowledgeable about the law of New Zealand. I don't know any such lawyers myself. And as I said, I've been practicing law a long time. 46 out of the 82 metaverses we studied require all disputes with the metaverse operator, or virtually all of them, to be adjudicated in private arbitration. So that means not only have you waived your right to litigate a claim in court in the US or a court anywhere, you actually have to submit it to private arbitration. And some of them say that that arbitration should take place, must take place in a foreign country. There's one that says that all disputes must be arbitrated in the city limits of Panama City, Panama. I haven't been there. I understand it's lovely, but it's probably quite expensive to find a lawyer and litigate a case from start to finish, an arbitration in Panama City, Panama. Sounds like it could be a little inconvenient and might dissuade someone with a legitimate dispute from trying to pursue an international arbitration. So out of the 82 metaverses we studied, 59 of them contain indemnification provisions. So what does that mean? These provisions say that the user must indemnify the metaverse operator if the metaverse operator gets sued as a result of the actions of the user on the metaverse. This means that the user, indemnification means that the user must pay the legal fees that the metaverse operator incurs in defending the lawsuit, as well as pay any judgment or settlement in the case. And so that means even if someone has no valid claim against you or the metaverse operator, you nevertheless are on the hook for the legal fees to defend that case, even if you win. So in the United States, anyway, in the UK, the winner typically is awarded their attorney's fees. So the winner gets their attorney's fees. In the United States, we don't have that rule. Even if you win, when you're defending a case with no merit against you, you're still out the attorney's fees. And under these indemnification provisions, you not only have to pay to defend yourself, you've got to pay for lawyers to defend the metaverse operator if they are also a defendant in a case. How might that arise? Someone might claim that in a chat room, you said something that was defamatory against them or a product that they were offering, or you ripped off a design of something they had created in the metaverse, anything of that nature. When someone sues, they'll typically sue the person, the speaker, as well as the metaverse operator, under the theory that the metaverse operator is more likely to have money to pay a judgment in the event that the plaintiff wins the case. And so it's something to be aware of. As I said, 59, a strong majority of the 82 metaverse projects we looked at have this indemnification agreement that you enter into with the metaverse operator. When you check that box, it says, I agree to the terms of service. That's in the terms of service. Also, what about when you want to sell an NFT in a metaverse that you may have purchased in the metaverse or brought to the metaverse? This is interesting. There are costs associated with those transactions that are not often prominently disclosed to users. So we found in 11 only 11 of the 82 metaverses was there a disclosure of the amount of commissions that a seller must pay when they sell an NFT in the metaverse platform. Those commission rates range from a low of 2.5% all the way up to a high of 30%. So if you have a sword that is very valuable and you sell it for 1.0 ETH, you actually will receive only 0.70 ETH on that sale if you're making the sale on a metaverse platform that charges a 30% commission. Also, some other things to be aware of is the seller is required to pay sales tax under the terms of service. The metaverse operator does not collect and pay the sales tax. The seller is obligated to pay sales tax or a use tax associated with that transaction. So you need to get some tax advice if you're in the business of buying and selling NFTs, whether that's on a metaverse or on a actual trading platform like OpenSea or Super Rare or Reddit or something of that nature. Here's another one to look out for: content moderation policies. What is that all about? Well, you've all probably heard about it in the news when it comes to social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook, where people are suspended, or there might be hypothetically a high-profile political figure that could be banned from a social media platform because of violations of the content moderation policy. A lot of people, including me, were unaware that there were content moderation policies on most metaverse platforms. So in our study of the 82, we found that 64 of them had explicit content moderation policies that prohibit certain categories of speech. And they carry with them very significant consequences if you violate those policies. You can, for instance, be banned from the platform with no warning and with no right of appeal. And think about it. If you've invested a lot of capital in buying land or building for your company, stores or casinos, whatever, that's alarming. Well, is this actually anything to worry about? We look carefully at these content moderation policies, and some of them have some real ambiguities with them. A few of them say you can be banned if you say or do something that is offensive. They use the word offensive. Now, what is offensive is many times in the eye of the beholder, and it is difficult to know how the metaverse operator is going to view what is offensive and what's not offensive, because that's what will matter. If they deem something that you said or done or even created is offensive, then they have the right to suspend your account or ban you from the platform entirely. One of the platforms we looked at, their content moderation policy says you're prohibited from saying or creating anything that promotes dangerous activities. So what's interesting about that is many of these platforms that we're talking about are immersive gaming platforms where some of the games have as the primary objective killing other avatars, which is dangerous to the avatar. And so is that promotion of dangerous activities? That's the policy. One would assume that's not the intent of the metaverse operator. If you create a game on one of these platforms that provides developer tools to create games and people come and play those games? What if you create, a combat type game where they're shooting and killing? That's dangerous. So the problem is, as always, with content moderation policies, they have to be kind of generalized and they're subject to interpretation. And so you should be aware before you start investing serious time and capital in creating games or activities or even art in some of these platforms. What is the content moderation policy? What is its stated policy? And see if you can figure out how they're going about applying that policy and who does it and whether you actually have a right to appeal if someone concludes that you've done or said something that is offensive or dangerous. Finally, as I said at the outset, most people don't read the terms of service before they enter into this pretty important contract with the metaverse operator that sets forth the rules that will govern in that metaverse. But let's say, for instance, that you are a hyper-vigilant person and you follow the suggestion of Meta Lawman and read all of the terms of service of a metaverse platform before you enter the platform, open an account, and start participating in the platform and outfitting your avatar and playing games and buying NFTs, that you actually sit down and read the whole thing. Now, some of these terms of service are more than 30 pages long, so it's a little bit of an investment of time to get through it. But if you were the hyper-vigilant person and you went to that trouble of reading the whole thing, then you would know the rules that govern that metaverse, right? Well, unfortunately, no, not right. 77 of the 82 metaverses that we looked at permit the metaverse operator to change the terms of service at any time. So when you read those terms of service before you enter the metaverse and open an account and start engaging with the platform, if you read it all, the only thing you know is what the terms of service are at that moment. Now, many of them do not commit to giving any prior notice of changes to the terms of service. And many say that if you continue to use your account to engage on the platform after terms of service changes have been posted to the website, then you are deemed to have agreed to those changes and you will be bound contractually to whatever those changes say. Even if you only read the terms of service at the very beginning, you're subject to changes over time. So, as I said at the outset, I don't give legal advice, but I do have a couple suggestions for you to take away from this discussion. First, before you spend any of your hard-earned money on NFTs representing virtual assets in the metaverse, whether it's to dress up your avatar or to buy tools or implements to enhance your gaming play experience, please read the terms of service to make sure you will actually own what you buy, and you can take those NFTs with you or sell them when you leave. Secondly, before you invest significant capital to acquire NFTs representing virtual land or buildings or anything else in the metaverse, read the terms of service to make sure you will not only own those items, but also that you will have the right to continuous, uninterrupted access to those assets. This is critical, because if you own something that you can't access, what is the use to you? Thirdly, if you are a creative type, before you invest your valuable time in creating user-generated content within a particular metaverse, take a careful look at the terms of service to be sure you gain ownership rights and intellectual property rights to your own creation. In my opinion, if you built it, if you created it, you should own it. Unfortunately, that's not how it works in every metaverse platform. So check the terms of service before you commit to a particular platform all of your time and creative energies. And lastly, if you are a chief metaverse officer or a consultant working for a Fortune 500 company to develop a metaverse strategy, please take a careful look at the terms of service before you recommend that your client commit their corporate resources and their corporate reputations to a particular metaverse projects. Some platforms are far more hospitable to corporate investment than others. All right, to wrap things up here, I am pro metaverse. There are many great metaverse projects out there. My hope is that by shining a light on some of these surprising terms of service, the metaverse operators will voluntarily adopt more user-friendly rules. So until then, just make sure you know the rules of the metaverse you choose before you check that box and commit to that contract with the metaverse operator. My thanks again to Chris Lafayette for inviting me to be here with you today in the GatherVerse. This has been fun for me. This is Meta Lawman signing off. Have your best day. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Camargo, and I'm here to talk about regenerating trust through blockchain and Web3. So first, I'm going to talk about my story, like who am I, why I'm here, why I'm interested in blockchain, Web3, and regeneration. Then we're going to talk about what is regeneration, and afterwards, I'm going to give you a glimpse of the promise of blockchain and Web3 in terms of carbon credits, or, how to balance climate change and our footprint on Earth. So, well, my story begins when I was a very little girl and I absolutely knew what I was going to study, which was veterinary medicine. I love animals. I'm very, very compassionate towards them. I just find them very cute. Like, they're all very cute. I love them. And that's why I decided to study medicine to take care of animals, and all kinds of animals, not just pets, So during my career, I encountered several things that I was not expecting at all. So first, I didn't know much about animal agriculture, to be honest. I just thought the cows were happy, and after a while, they will take them to the slaughterhouse because we needed protein, right? We need to eat them. But during my career, I realized that we eat animals that are being produced in a very industrialized way. Like, I never thought reproduction of animals would be the way it is, which is like a whole other concept I'm not going to talk about. But if you think about it, to produce more than 80 billion land animals for us to eat every year, we need a lot of resources. And we need a lot of practices to make this, possible. So I kind of learned everything, because apparently veterinarians not only take care of pets, but most of us take care of the animals we eat. So I had to deal, and it was kind of hard, but I had to go to a slaughterhouse and see how the process was and everything. So that got me to question myself and my habits and my social and cultural norms like nothing ever before. And so I realized that I was not being aligned with my principles and values and actions. Because my principles and values, on one hand, were mostly like love and compassion towards animals and everyone. But then my actions were not reflecting that, because I was eating a dead animal. And I thought I needed the protein. So I started to do a lot of research about it and realized animal protein is not actually necessary to our health. It actually causes a lot of harm, because if you eat a lot of animal protein, your body is not gonna be able to process it like at all. Usually, when you eat meat, that will stay in your digestive system for about 8 days. But if you eat plants, it will stay in your digestive system less than 1 day. So there are a lot of implications on eating animals in our health. One of those is high cholesterol. We are animals, we produce our own cholesterol, but if we take a lot of cholesterol and we eat a lot of that, our cholesterol increases and we have heart disease and we have diabetes. And these are the most um, common diseases on earth. It's not even COVID. So I was saying that it was not only cruel, it was unhealthy to eat animals. But then I started to realize, when I saw like how the farms worked, that it was not sustainable either and not at all efficient, because to produce 1 pound of beef you need around 100 pounds of plants or feed. It could be corn, it could be soy, usually genetically modified, because I mean the animals we eat, they're not giving natural food. It's everything is highly industrialized. So think about this. 10,000 years ago, humans made 1% of the biomass, and nature and wild animals made 99% of the biomass. Today, humans and the animals we own as property are 98% of the biomass, and only 2% ends up to be natural biomass. This is crazy. If we think about it, the primary cause of loss of a species and habitat destruction is caused by animal agriculture. 91% of rainforests has been destroyed to produce genetically modified organisms full of chemicals that then we feed to the animals that we eat. So a lot of things are not working in this whole system, right? And on the top of it, I was learning that 80% of antibiotics are used by veterinarians to give them to animals so that they can increase their weight much faster. So this was not what I was expecting when I started studying veterinary medicine. And I was doing a lot of research and vaccine development, and I decided to switch towards the business side, because I figured that if I could create a big impact on Earth, it had to be a business, because it's very, very hard to change people's mind and behaviors and social and cultural norms. But if you can make a sustainable business that tackles behavior and environment, then I could have a great impact on that. So I decided to come to the United States and do a master's degree in international business. Now I'm doing my second master's degree on entrepreneurship and innovation, and I'm super happy with this because I feel like now I have the tools to expand all this knowledge and make awareness about how can we live more sustainable, and not only in our personal lives but in the business level, right? um, Now let's talk about regeneration, because this concept is very new. Not everyone knows it. I actually knew it very recently. One of my electives, I took it in Dubai, and I met Mark Fredericks, which is the founder of Local to Local, a company in Netherlands. And he explained to me what regeneration is and the potential that regeneration has, not only to our bodies, but to the environment and to our social systems. So, just to define regeneration, it's basically putting life at the center of every action and decision. And it applies to all life, not only human life, you know, grassland, farms, insects, forest, fish, wetlands, coastlands, and oceans. And it also applies to communities, it applies to schools, to commerce, and to governments. Sorry about that. So, regeneration creates, it builds, it heals. And it's what nature has always been doing, regenerating itself. Our cells regenerate themselves. The soil can regenerate itself. And we are life. And we should take care of life in all of its forms. Why this concept is so important to me, and hopefully to all of you, because it not only tackles climate change, but it also makes you think about your actions. Are my actions empowering life and love, or are my actions empowering other things? The magic of blockchain technology is basically that we are connecting each other through a decentralized network to exchange value and create trust, right? This is the whole concept that has revolutionized many industries, and it's going to revolutionize many more industries. And at the end, it's not about the technology, but more about ourselves. And I want to bring carbon credits to all this talk because I think there's a great opportunity to empower governments and corporations to adopt new regulations that actually work. Why? Because if you think about it, what governments are trying to do is that they all try to reduce emissions by telling these industries you cannot produce more emissions than this amount. And so the industries and the companies, what they do is that they buy carbon credits to balance out this accounting principle of net zero, right? But guess what? Only 2% of those carbon credits actually work, actually are doing what it needs to be done in order to get to net zero. It's crazy, but yeah, only around 2% is effective. Why? I mean, it's very difficult to verify. They are very complex. It's very difficult to measure the impact of these carbon credits. And a lot of companies, what they do is that they greenwash their brands. So, oh, we are carbon net zero. We don't have emissions because we buy carbon credits. But actually, these carbon credits they're buying, they're not helping at all. They're just paperless transactions that have nothing to do with creating a balanced ecosystem. So, as it is very difficult to verify, blockchain can bring a lot of benefits in this because through blockchain technology, we can actually measure not only the carbon emissions, but the carbon offsets that regenerative practices produce. So, for example, having land, okay, not maybe animal agriculture, but having land that is full of forests is actually very good to retain that carbon from the atmosphere to the earth. There are many ways in regenerative agriculture that we can make this much more effective, and we can make this in a industry level. But the problem is right now that first, we don't really know what the consequences are for us to eat products that are being unsustainably produced. Not only meat and fish and dairy, but also there are many veggies and plant-based foods that have a lot of chemicals, a lot of pesticides, and they're actually killing our microbiome inside our bodies. So imagine this. What if we, through the products we buy and through the different tokens we exchange, a royalty will go to regenerative projects so that we can regenerate our land and our ecosystems. Imagine if the government and all the policies are evolved in a way using blockchain technology that every penny spent, a percentage of that will go directly to fund or empower different regeneration projects. This will completely shift our economy and our way to tackle climate change. It will make it much more effective. It will make it accessible to everyone. And it would actually change our behavior, because if we know an NFT or a digital asset or a physical asset backed by its digital copy has in their smart contract a way of linking those royalties or that percentage that we bought directly with a regenerative project, then it's just a matter of time that we're going to solve this climate crisis. And I empower you all right now to think about your daily habits, to think about not only what the government is doing, what are you doing for your own health, for your planet, and for the next generations that will come. Being net zero, it's not enough. And just letting governments and companies take care of that, I think it's not enough. It's good that we have some tools, but what you do in your daily life, try to make it regenerative. Try to choose life and love, and empower your communities to do this as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope to meet you all soon. Bye.
Hello to all my friends. I'm Vinita Chatterjee, Disney lead actress and Metaverse evangelist. Well, I'm extremely excited to be a part of this grand summit, which discusses the most crucial aspect of the Metaverse, that is, laws and governance. Well, as we all know, laws are extremely essential and crucial part of any kind of ecosystem, and the Metaverse, above all, requires concrete and constructive laws that can make all of our lives much, much better. So here is my presentation on laws for good governance in the Metaverse. Sit back and enjoy this presentation. The world of Web3 provides us with a hope for the revival of humanity. It is a new world built on the principles of democracy and good governance as we shatter the dominance of the monopolistic giants ruling the roost today. As a human race, we come together to build a revived world as we rise from the ashes of our chaotic past. And in order to do so, we need the law to make this new world of Web3 in perfect order. The Metaverse, laws for good governance. Technology has made creators think beyond the limits of human power. We can now enjoy advanced versions of animations, special effects, and virtual engagement using the new age resources. Exploring the virtual world has always been a major push point for the curious human mind. We always try to find answers to the unknown, the unexplored, and the unchallenged. While pulling all the strings of our great minds, we finally discovered the Metaverse. This next generation technology opens doors for a virtual world where people can connect, interact, and experience real life scenarios. It exists as a digital space on the internet, while users can immerse themselves in an intuitive virtual environment. Stuffed with an array of unprecedented features, the Metaverse is everything we want our future to be like. In no time, the virtual world technology has emerged as one of the most popular destinations for social networking, e-gaming, and business activities. The Metaverse has accepted to abide by the general laws that apply to the web so as to bring a sense of uniformity, security, and transparency within its ecosystem. So here are some laws that govern the internet and also is accepted by all virtual spaces, including the Metaverse. The copyright law strives to provide protection to the original work of creators, artists, and writers. When we talk about the Metaverse, the statute incorporates user-generated digital content such as avatars, virtual real estate, and other artwork. With the surge in the popularity of digital assets, the copyright law becomes significant for the Metaverse domain. The creator of a copyrighted item has the exclusive right to recreate, trade, and display the work out to others. They can authorize other people as well to do the work on their behalf. If the authorized person violates the law, then the original creator can sue them for copyright infringement. The intellectual property law. The IP law preserves the rights of creators against their inventions, trademarks, or other creations. With the rise and the popularity of non-fungible tokens, which are an inevitable part of the Metaverse space, IP law has become quite important for proper governance. Technology firms will soon compete to develop more advanced AR and VR tools, including high-tech eyewear, headsets, etc. This will unlock new opportunities for intellectual property rights in the sector, like new patents for software and devices. New brands will come up, paving the way for new trademarks for the virtual world users. The creation of enhanced online portals will lead the way for new patent and copyright safety measures for software-focused inventions and games related to blockchain and crypto. Contract law. In the metaverse, contract law levies the formation and enforcement of contracts made between the users. The agreements made here incorporate a plethora of activities such as trading virtual goods and renting virtual lands. Like any other contract, an agreement in the metaverse compels both the parties to follow the terms of the pact. In case one party fails to comply with the terms of the contract, the other party has the right to sue them for breach of contract. Tort law. Tort law directs towards civil wrongs, including property damages and personal damages. In the metaverse, the statute governs any harmful activity caused by the users to other participants. This can include emotional stress, physical assaults, and property damages. Defamation law. This statute protects people from false accusations and damaging comments by any other person. In the metaverse, it refers to user-generated content that is critical of another brand. Falsely accusing someone and damaging their social status can make the defaulter get charged under the defamation law. Regulations of NFTs and tax. Non-fungible tokens in the metaverse are subjected to traditional financial regulations such as commodities, banking, and securities law. The way in which these assets are created and exchanged, it might establish them as investment contracts and thus bring them under the purview of securities law. The issuance, lending, and trading of cryptocurrencies in the metaverse is likely to apply banking, money transfer, and other financial regimes to the system. The purchase and sale of virtual goods attracts tax implications involving sales tax and income tax regimes. Financial authorities have already brought virtual assets or crypto under the tax umbrella, making the profits taxable for the earners. This makes the NFTs used in the metaverse also attract tax implications similar to crypto. Now let's discuss the 5 major goals that we wish to achieve in the metaverse. Number 1. Complete freedom by utilizing decentralization. Despite potential user growth, the real issue at hand is that social media networks control all aspects of our experience in the world of Web 2. It is centralized. However, there is a decentralized way to moderate. Each user can take part via a vote of governance structure that decides how loud your voice can be. This vote is you, the user. Number 2. Creating a global universal income for every user. The ability to distribute a global universal income for everyone is a unique value proposition that the metaverse can achieve. It promises that they share wealth. This sharing they do proportionately with the users. It involves 3 aspects. Number 1, user acquisition. Number 2, token trading volume. Number 3, token price. The idea is that the state of the real world economy won't affect their metaverse economy. In other words, corporations go down on the outside of the real world. Number 3. Allowing users to control its policies. One of the main goals of the metaverse is to give full control to the users. This happens through councils and public boards. In this point, DAOs are the perfect tool to achieve this. Centrally controlled metaverses limit their scalability options. Everybody in the creative process gets cut off from their fair share. This way, these firms will have limited control. Number 4. A circular economy. This means that everything can be sellable and tradable using the blockchain. This means that anyone can buy, sell, and trade everything. For instance, your content, profile, name, or location, all this can change hands between the users. You can use it in the virtual or physical world. Number 5. Interact in an immersive metaverse. In this world, users can communicate and find information, among many other things. This opens up endless possibilities. As such, it's part of the new virtual internet world, or Web3. Therefore, there should be no limitation on the original design. Instead, it should be open. It should offer never-ending opportunities and possibilities. The metaverse is growing exponentially with constant support from investors and business entities. The scope of the metaverse is expanding quickly. Where earlier it was limited to gaming projects, today the technology has become an inevitable part of multi-billion-dollar worth industrial realms. Its application is widely appreciated in the sports sector, entertainment world, and business fields. Global music brands and producers are shifting to the metaverse for hosting concerts and interacting with fans. The metaverse unlocks opportunities for brands and celebrities to launch their official merchandise for fans to purchase. The virtual world makes users enjoy real-life experiences in a simulated environment with unmatched potential for entertainment and earnings. I feel the metaverse will soon evolve not only our digital interactions, but also the subject of law, as lawmakers will be challenged with the fundamental questions of sovereignty, identity, property, deterrence, and justice, which undoubtedly will lead to conscious reform. Peaceful and inclusive societies provide access to justice for all and foster sustainable development for humanity to thrive. Well, that was my presentation on the laws of good governance in the metaverse. Well, I hope you liked the presentation as much as I did while researching on the concept. As we all know, the metaverse is in its phase of evolution. It is evolving day by day, and we require more and more interesting and efficient laws to make it a safe and a happy place for all of us to be together and make this world a more beautiful and harmonious one.
Have we done enough? Have we said enough? Certainly not. We have a long way to go. We ask that you tell the story of what's been expressed in these few intimate hours that we had together. We do this with help and great consideration from all of our community partners, our sponsors, and more importantly, our community itself. Without you, we're unable to do this. GatherVerse cannot happen unless we have community. We don't deal in gaming engines. We are one of a human engine. Everything that we've said today, dealing with humanity first standards of accessibility and education and safety and privacy and wellness, equality and community development, all that we've expressed when it comes to legal and governance. Take this story, tell someone about it, what you heard today, contribute, connect with our speakers, be part of our community. No one can do it alone in building this metaverse and emerging technologies. And remember, we're not building the metaverse as a place of seclusion. We're building the metaverse as a tool to help build this present reality that we find ourselves in, hopefully a little bit better. Thank you, and may our gather always be well. Farewell.